Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is Anthony Manna, and we're going to be talking to him today about his book, Lucas and the Game of Chance. Anthony Manna, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. Thanks a lot. I
Uh,
appreciate the invitation.
Oh, my pleasure. It's a fascinating book. We've got a lot to talk about it, but before we get to that, as viewers and listeners are familiar, we'd like to start things off talking about anything we may have read or watched lately, if we liked them or we didn't like them. I'll go first just to give Anthony a little time to, collect his thoughts. A couple of movies that I watched. One was Captain America: Brave New World. It was good, not great. I liked it, didn't love it. Don't think I need to see it again. And finally had a chance that I'd only seen clips and never seen the whole thing straight through. The classic Whatever Happened to Baby Jane with Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. Oh my God, what a crazy movie that is. I loved it, but it was so creepy. But it was really good. And I loved reading a little bit about the trivia, including I think it took them like 3 weeks to film it. And they did it for as cheaply as possible, and it doesn't show on the screen. It looks really good. I just loved it, and so glad I finally got a chance to see it. Anthony, what about you? Anything noteworthy that you read or watched lately?
Well, here, whatever happened to Baby Jane? I was on my way. I was on my way through someone's environment, and then I stopped, and I remembered seeing it years ago, and remember how creepy it is.
Hmm.
And I just thought, don't do this to yourself. I'm finding that the older I'm getting, that stuff stays with me for
Hmm.
longer than I wish. But what did I do? I stayed there and I watched her torment. I watched the struggle and the
Hmm.
horrible feelings about people.
Yeah,
So,
and the one thing I was amazed by is that I really thought that since I never seen the whole thing, I always thought it was almost like split evenly between how much Betty Davis got and how much Joan Crawford got. But it's much more Betty Davis's movie, especially with as the complications ensue and the conflicts arise and everything keeps spiraling out of control. It's like, wow, and that Joan Crawford almost disappears for a good portion of it.
yeah, yeah. So it's you kind of I kind of tremble my way through it. Something else, something that I'm reading is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison.
Okay.
I mean, it's very controversial these days and being banned all over the place. And I had read it years ago, and it's absolutely startling in it it just walks right into the middle of racism.
Hmm.
So,
Are you a big fan of Toni Morrison's work, or is this just one of those, hey, I've heard this is good, I want to take a look at it?
oh no, I adore her work. Yeah, no, I mean, I've always thought, could I ever write like that?
Hmm.
I mean, she startles with her descriptions, and sometimes I just stop and write down a phrase or two, not necessarily to repeat it in my own writing, but
Hmm.
only because it gives me courage that you can do such things with language.
Yeah, I found because like I'm like one of my favorite authors is John Steinbeck, and I always think,
Yeah.
I could never write like that, but I love reading his work. And does it have, I guess, almost a subconscious influence on my own writing? I don't do a lot of prose, but when I used to, I think you could kind of see it. I was like almost attempting to emulate what he was doing.
Yeah.
But I think it really comes down. I just love reading his stuff, and it's just great material. So I just love that. But okay, so we are talking again to Anthony Manna. His book is Lucas and the Game of Chance. I'm going to read his bio, which is in the back of the book. Anthony Manna's first collaboration with Sula Mitakidu. Hope I did that. Did I do that one right?
Wonderful.
Okay. With Sula Mitakidu, Mr. Semelinas Semelinas, a Greek folktale, illustrated by Giselle Potter, was an ALA/ALSC notable book, a Marian Vanet Ridgway Award winner, and a New York Public Library Best Book for Children. Another collaboration of theirs, The Orphan, a Cinderella story from Greece, illustrated by Giselle Potter, was a Bank Street College of Education Best Book of 2012. They also collaborated on the anthology, Folk Tales from Greece, A Treasury of Delights. There was a theme developing here. Anthony has worked with children and teen trains in drama and storytelling, has been an actor, director of children's theater, vehicle repossessor, and janitor, and has taught in schools and universities in Turkey, Greece, Albania, and the United States. He divides his time between Ohio and Arizona. Okay, so first, Anthony, let's start a little bit talking about you. I mean, how did you get your start? That were you always a writer? Were you a voracious reader as a child, or was it something that came to you later in life?
All of it later. All of it totally later. I spent a lot of my life as an academic
Hmm.
at university and universities, around, from, as you say, there in different countries. And because of that uh, occupation, the requirement was to publish your research, and I was at Kent State University in Kent, Ohio. And it was very obvious there that when I took the position that I was expected to publish research, and I liked it. It was okay because I what I did with research was I spent a lot of time with classroom teachers, and I would go into their rooms and collaborate with them about life and literature, so and the literary arts, and drama. So when I was in, and then because at Kent State University, I just all of a sudden I discovered one day this program called the Greek Exchange, and I thought, ooh, the Greek Exchange, what the heck is that? So what it was they would send me there, and one of their professors when we're university there would come here to Kent State University, and it was a thriving program. And I thought, let me try there. You have to apply because they give you a grant. I mean, they're going to cover your travel and your expenses when you're there. And I I went there, and I was in actually in a school, a kindergarten, a Greek kindergarten with an interpreter, a
Hmm.
translator, etc., and spent the whole year, in a sense, studying their literacy acts. Let me put it that way. I wanted to find out what do they do with, especially with storytelling, because the Greeks are notorious for their stories and their storytelling, as we well know. And so, uh, in the midst of that, I was introduced to these beautiful crystalline stories of traditional stories. I mean, whether we call them fairy tales or folk tales or
Hmm.
whatever you name them, they're just these magnificent stories that have stayed with us and stayed with the Greeks for hundreds. I mean, for I can't even imagine, how they've been around for a long time. And so I said to Sula Mitakidu, my Greek colleague, and a couple of her other professors there, I want to try to translate some of these, and not only translate them, but reimagine them. Because usually what people say is it's a retelling. And I said to myself, no, it's not. You don't retell the story. You reimagine it, you reshape it, you restructure it. And so she said, well, let's try a hand at it. And that brought us to Mr. Semolinos. And we brought it to Knopf. Knopf was still in operation in New York City. And Ann Schwartz, just a magnificent editor, said, "This is really bad, but I think we'll help. I'll try to help you with it." And that's what she did. She just worked through it because she knew there was a kernel there of entertainment. Let me put it that way, and she stayed with us. And she's still in my mind because when I'm writing now, I think of particularly the shortcuts. She would say, you don't have to say everything. You leave it alone for a while, And so we would go with her through Mr. Semolinas, and eventually, as you read, the awards came from it, etc. I mean, it was received very graciously.
Okay, so I did want to ask, so as we kind of mentioned in your bio, that there's a lot of Greek-related stories. So did all of those stem from this exchange, like you going there and just kind of like falling in love with, Greek stories and, as you said, folk tales and fairy tales and for the most part, I guess like almost a Greek mythology.
Yeah, well, I fell in love with Greece, you
Okay.
know, and Kent State University said, "All right, Manna, you can go for a semester," and I stayed for 2 years. Because I would call the dean and just say, "May I stay another semester?" Et cetera. Because what was happening was not only did I really enjoy the research, because when I went into a kindergarten classroom with three very, very wonderful teachers, and all of them spoke English,
Hmm.
so that was to my benefit. But there's no separation of church and state in Greece. And so I was able to go through the holidays. I was able to go through the festivities. I was invited into the festivities. I was invited into families. So I was just taken aback. And I thought, I like it here. I like it here. And so when I first started getting to the stories, I also liked the stories. And I thought, come on. So I would go into the folklore library at the university, which was a great place because you actually climb the ladder to get up to the upper stacks, you
Hmm.
know, and I would just look, and I was learning Greek, as best I could. I was probably better at it translating it than speaking it, but
Hmm.
I was learning Greek, and so I was able to translate as best I could, and then bring them to my colleague Sula and say, "What do you think of this one?" And we just kept at it. And then I eventually had to return to the States, or else I would have lost my job. So I said, "All right, I'm coming back." And then I went back. They granted me again another grant to go back occasionally. So I would go back, let's say during the summer, or during long holidays,
Hmm.
to spend like a few days there, because we were continuing the writing, and we were at the same computer writing these stories. And so it was very satisfying.
Okay, so I have to ask, so before you took part in the exchange and then kind of, went to Greece and fell in love with it, were you still interested in writing and adapting these kinds of stories into books or however you want to present them, or was it just something that kind of grew out of like kind of discovering all of these stories?
That's what happened, the latter. It
Hmm.
was discovering the stories because, as I say, when I was at university, there was no idea in my mind that I would ever write a story. I mean, I was writing research articles, and I, I wanted to learn how to craft a story, and so I happened to be in the middle of this treasury called
Hmm.
Greek folk tales and fairy tales, legends and myths, etc. And so I thought, all right, well, let's just continue doing this.
Okay. So okay, let's move on to because you've wrote a couple of books, and that leads us once again to here we go. Lucas and the Game of Chance. So, what was the inspiration for this? What I thought was a fascinating because I read some of the background about it is
Yeah.
that it's two stories combined,
Yes.
which I thought was fascinating because overall it just seems like it's one traditional folk kind of story. But can you
Yeah.
kind of give us a little bit of background about like what prompted you to say, hey, I got this story. Oh, and there's this other story that would mesh really well with it. What's the background leading up to what became the book?
Well, I always, when I talk about that, when I talk about um, Lucas and the Game of Chance, I always talk about the fact that but in the back of my mind was always the idea of a story of resilience and survival, and dealing with the slings and arrows of misfortune.
Hmm.
And as one go through that. And what I did was I decided that Sula was gone now. I was going to do this on my own. And I was going to try to create out of these two stories, I was going to try to create, in my mind, a full-fledged fantasy. And so I kind of really broke away from the Greek tradition in the sense that the cadence of the language, the the deliberation about characterization, etc. I broke away as best I could to try to shape my own story. And so, yes, I combined these two pieces from these two, as I explained in the afterword in the book itself, that I took pieces and reshaped them as best I could to create this entity. The creatures that Lucas meets on the way to meet Destiny's Sun and Moon were pretty much created by me.
Hmm.
You know, they were hinted at a little bit in the story that he was he was going to be bound to these critters that were nasty,
Hmm.
you know, and how would he would escape them. But I liked working with them, and I liked working with the dialogue that I could create for how they speak. And I also liked their the fact that they listened to him
Hmm.
and and petitioned him to speak to because they had their own problems and they opened up about this. And so
Hmm.
it was very interesting. And of course the same thing with Snake that he befriends in the beginning of the story was it was I think it was hinted at. I don't even think it was mentioned in the those two stories that I combined, but I just figured why not, you know? And the relationship I loved how that relationship developed over time because they became to trust each other
Hmm.
and grew in really loving each other. And as you were toward the very end of the tale, um, the snake comes back as a spirit
Hmm.
and helps Lucas survive.
Well, I was going to say, I think we might even be getting a little ahead of ourselves because you're talking about details of the story and kind of, I guess you kind of, that requires you to give like here's the pitch, here's a thumbnail sketch of the story. If you could do that, because I think that would probably help clarify a lot of things for people who are like, wait, what, Snake and Destiny? So, wait, what is he talking about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Do you want to do? We could read the. I don't even think I brought that book with me right now. It's really weird, but we could read um, some of the blurb on the book itself that people have written about.
I think it's on the
Yeah,
back. Let's
no,
see.
no, you know what? And I have a better one here that I worked on with a publisher.
Sure.
You want me to, I'll read this, and I
Yeah,
think
that's
it's
fine.
yeah. Sooner or later, we all make mistakes, fail, experience tough times, but we all can find the courage to face our struggles, persevere, survive, and turn our life around. This is the lesson Lucas learns in my 6,000, 16,000. See, because I was pitching this to editors, you know,
Ah, okay.
word story for readers 10 and up. A reimagined Greek folktale, Lucas and the Game of Chance, is a story of a flute playing boy who befriends a mysterious talking, dancing snake. The snake bestows fortune and favor upon Lucas, but some years later, tempted by greed and pride, Lucas loses all his riches and even his family. He now must embark on a treacherous journey filled with suspense and intrigue to find destiny, sun, and moon. The trek to Destiny's kingdom is terrifying. The forest creatures haunt. The strange souls Lucas meets along the forest path threaten his endurance and his will to survive. He trudges on. He will beg the three supernatural powers to forgive him his foolishness at gambling away his family and riches in a game of chance. Destiny, sun, and moon will surely allow him to reverse his misfortune, restore his honor, and win back all that he loves and treasures, won't they?
I love ending on a question. That's always a great part. So one of the things I did want to ask that as you were putting these things together, were there story components that you had to cut or had to change? And you said like you even came up with some things on your own. Was it just a big process of like taking these two stories and then combining them and just and reshaping them and molding them into the story that you wanted to tell?
That's what I had to do
Hmm.
because in my mind, I wanted to break away, you know, from my reliance totally on the Greek traditions and the Greek language and the Greek, you know, the themes, and make my own way. And so what I would do is I would just spend a lot of time reshaping, what I would think would be maybe suggested in the two stories that I was working with, but try to reshape it into make it larger, make it more, more of a cinematic.
Hmm. Okay, that makes sense. So I also wanted to ask, so one of the sections, so this is my personal opinion. So Lucas goes on this journey and he, re reaches his goal, so to speak, but he has to complete some more tasks. And the one thing I was wondering is that he really speeds through the completing of the tasks. I was wondering, had you thought about expanding those because it to in just from my perspective, he gets through with them very quickly, and I was really hoping that to see him go through more challenge to accomplish the three requests that these individuals the parties he meets along the way that he has
Yeah.
to go back through them. I was really hoping that there would be more. Was that something you had considered, or was that how the story goes that you were working with?
Well, that's just what happened when I was working with it. But I mean, no, the thing is, at some point, I think it's like with the story that I'm working on right now, which, you kind of stop and you think, wait a minute, is this developing into a novel? And
Mm,
then with a group of writers that I worked with the story that I'm working on right now, they said to me, we think you have a YA book here, meaning young adult fiction.
sure.
And I thought, wow, I do, and yeah, for the substance of it, the content, that put it that way, and the themes, and the elaboration of it, So I mean, with Lucas in the Game of Chance, I never really thought about elaborating it further. It just didn't enter my imagination.
Hmm. Okay. Because I was wondering that I would that's something I would have I guess because you had all this build up to it and I was really hoping to see like this is how he's going to handle it. Here's how he's going to rectify the conflict. Here's how he's going to solve the problem. And it's just kind of like zip zip zip. Okay.
Then he was
Takes care of
gone.
it really fast.
Yeah.
Uh that's perfectly fine. So a lot of your material is original, but you're also is Lucas in the Game of Chance? Is that like the start of like starting to adapt more things and kind of, as we said, reshaping them into your own interpretation, or is it what is your approach to this kind of story?
Well, I've kind of taken off, and I think with the story that I'm working on right now, it's developing into in my imagination, it's developing into it's very satisfying, but it's also challenging, and it's like this is moving forward in a way. I'm elaborating,
Hmm.
and I'm more confident, I think, as a writer of story, because I mean, Mr. Semolinas was the first story that we worked on, and that's not too long ago,
Hmm.
So I mean, it takes a long time to develop the craft, and a lot of patience, and so uh, and the fact that I mean, I've had to stop writing a lot because I ran into medical issues along the way. But people say, well, where is this new story you're working on? What happened? Where did it go? I said, I'm still working on it, dear. But the problem is I'm an old man and I run into problems physically, So I was in the hospital, and what was I going to do? So it you work on it. I'm working on it. I'm keeping at it, but it's slow, and that's the other thing, that I try to uh, tell other writers not to do what I was doing at the beginning, which was to compare myself to those who do 3 books, 4 books, 5 books a year. You
Hmm.
know, I'm just not like that. I'm not that quick, at it. And so, I tell other writers, don't worry about it. And well, other writers have told me, I mean, when I go on complaining about it, like, oh, gee, I mean, what am I doing? I mean, the last book was 2019 and already it's 2020. What is it, 2030, for God's sakes? What am I doing?
Almost.
Yeah, almost. And so people would say to me, calm down, man. You act like you're from New Jersey. And I say, yeah, I am.
So am
Yeah,
I.
I'm from New Jersey. Yeah. So, I'm just taking my time with it and it feels
Mhm.
good. Let me, there's a quotation that I use from one of my favorite illustrators, Amina Robinson. She says, making books is meditation. It's where I find peace. It's bliss, true bliss. And I would say to her, I miss her very much. She passed
Mhm.
about 5 years ago. I would say, she would say, well, Anthony, are you writing? And I would go, I'm trying. And she would go, that is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard in my life. You're either doing it or not doing it, but you're
Mhm.
not trying. Trying sounds like you're a potter or something, and this is different. So I just had to slow down and realize that it is the speed that I work with, and so I'm trying to answer that question in a sense of when piecing together and narrating and piecing together, narrating and piecing together. It's like it takes me a lot of thought,
Mhm.
and and so working at the computer and reshaping the scene, sometimes I can find myself doing that for like almost 3 or 4 days,
Mhm.
and
Well, I can totally relate to everything that you're saying because like for me it's writing screenplays and I see a lot of my peers they're able to crank out, like two or three scripts a year and it takes me a really long time just to outline, to get the story to where I want it to be. And because I used to be a runner and so I would say like everybody runs at their own pace that if somebody's going to cross the finish line before you and someone's going to cross it after you, don't worry about either of them. Focus on you crossing the finish line and take as long as you need to get there because it's your race.
that's beautiful. Thank you. I'll remember that.
Yeah, please do. Please attribute it to me. So I
I
was
It's
I
your
wonder.
race.
So I also would ask. So a lot of your work, both as a writer and working, as we talked in your bio, working with acting groups, it tends to skew a little younger. Now, what is it that draws you to wanting to work with, I guess, younger groups? Is it just because they're more open to that kind of story? They're more appreciative of that kind of story. Just you like the youthful energy it gives off. A little
Well,
of everything.
they're a lot of fun, and I was working at one point. I left the University of Maine because that's where I was,
Hmm.
and I decided that I was going to do something different with my life. Well, that didn't last very long, but the point was that I became one of the directors in a children's theater in Maine, a children's theater run by children. I mean, it was children were in the theater and they were the actors and actresses.
Hmm.
And so there I was. Now what? What do I? Because I had been in theater myself as an actor, and with adult directors and sponsors and producers, etc. And there I am, and again, it was like one of those learning curves. What do you do? So what I learned to do was to appreciate their energy, and their suggestions. We did a lot of improvisation in practice, and as a matter of fact, a couple of our stories developed into an improvisational theater. And we presented them, and people just thought they were a riot. So it was just learning the pace, and learning how to encourage, because in the adult theater, directors would, I mean, I wouldn't say they were callous, but they were they were open to just telling you what was going on. I mean,
Hmm.
you're not walking fast enough. you're dribbling your voice. Come on, get with it. Stay in the scene. But you wouldn't talk to the young children like that. I mean, I would try to nurture them a little bit more. And it was very good for me to learn patience. So, and we had a lot of fun. And at one point, we traveled together in a minibus. I mean, I had to get a special license and all that jazz. But we went to different schools and performed, and it was oh, they just loved it. I mean, they were just, I mean, they were autographing and stuff like that, which is just too much to handle. So we had,
So they've all been bitten by the showbiz bug, so
yeah, yeah.
you can't stop it. I did, so that kind of the follow-up question to that is like, what sort of material do you focus on when you're working with younger groups, and do you try to keep it more lighthearted and more humorous, or do they appreciate not serious hard drama, but something with a little more heft to it? I mean, how do they respond to it?
Well, the first thing I went at was humor, and so we would take stories that were really pretty funny when you were reading them to see if we could reproduce them
Hmm.
visually, and we worked on those a lot. And there was a Tommy, let's see, wait a minute, I'm trying to think of his name now. It's slipping out of my mind. But the story is called Stregonona, which is
Hmm.
a grandmother tale, and it we worked on that, and it had a side effect of being very, very serious, and we tried to. And so the idea was, how do you do that? How do you take care of the serious side of this stregonona, this grandma witch, you could have called her, you
Hmm.
know, and also the humor of it, because the humor was there as well. And I think it caught on. I think I was beginning to see that they could handle heavier material. But then again, if if I had moved with them into adolescence, see, because they were mostly elementary school kids,
Hmm.
so if I had moved into adolescence, I think we would have done a lot more with you know more serious works.
Hmm. Okay. Well, once again, I want to remind everybody we are talking to Anthony Manna. We're talking about his book, Lucas and the Game of Chance, and all of the things that have stemmed from that. I did want to ask you a bit. So, with your extensive work in working on and adapting, folk tales and fairy tales, what do you attribute the appeal is? Like, why have these stories just hung around for not even centuries, but millennia?
Oh, I love that question. Look, I've written about this a little bit, in my academic writing.
Hmm.
I mean, I just I can't stop. I mean, it's like y- greed, love, hope, death, life, supernaturalism.
Hmm.
I mean, it's every single aspect of the rainbow of life, is reflected in these stories. I mean, they just you can find any aspect of developing human nature, not developing human nature, and just see that these stories just reflect every aspect of human life. And so I think that's why they have so much appeal, you know. And then they're also, and then the other thing about them is that they're very entertaining, because they pretty much, unlike mythology, they don't deal so much with kings and queens and royalty. They deal with everyday folk.
Hmm.
And so I think that also is the appeal. And I noticed that when I was in Greece, when in the middle of we would be in a restaurant, and all of a sudden somebody would get up and start telling a story, and it was like, yeah, okay. I mean, it was a story about this this guy who fell in love with the snake, and it was, yeah, and I mean, it would go on, and he was awarded, and his wife wondered where he was getting all this money, and it was trivial on one level and also very sincere on the other. And so, it was like these stories really deal pretty much with human nature in all of its aspects, and I think that's what brings us back to them all the time. And I noticed with children, and also, let's say up maybe into middle school, when I go into a school and share my manuscript and share what I'm working on, they take to it right away because
Hmm.
I think they see that there's aspects of themselves are being deliberated. Then, and then I did this, and I invented this writing prompt, and it was called they all lived happily ever after. But what if they didn't? And I mean, the teacher in the room looked at me and thought, "Uh-oh, we're in serious trouble." No, I mean, then I came back a week later, and they were just like, "Please let me read," and they started reading these things, and we were in hysterics most of the time and sometimes it wasn't so hysterical. Sometimes it was really belligerent,
Hmm.
and that's what happened. I mean, all of a sudden I realized that they're also reflecting the temper, the tone, whatever you want to call it, of these folk tales and fairy tales.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really thought you were going to say that. You say, and they lived happily ever after. And then I thought the follow-up was, and then what happened?
Yeah,
Because a lot of people will take that and they'll take the happy ending and they'll try to figure out, is there a way to make this all go to hell? Then the prince and Cinderella realize they can't stand each other. And that
correct.
sort of thing.
Thank you. Yeah, no. Well, I think that could also be a possible. I mean, yeah, with the orphan, which is one of the stories that we did. Well, you mentioned it. Here's the orphan.
Hmm.
Um, there is a sequel to the story, and we did present it to the editor in New York, and she just didn't want to take it. But it's a very mysterious sequel in the relationship with the prince. It materializes into something that no one would have ever imagined.
Hmm.
And it was a kernel of truth in the research that we did with the orphan. And so Sula, when I said to Sula, why don't we try to write it as a sequel? And I still want to do that because I liked when I told kids she she moves on, and this is some of what happens, and they went, yeah, 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 it's like, yeah, tell it. So
Hmm.
I think there's something there.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, again, we are talking to Anthony Manna and his book Lucas and the Game of Chance. So, Anthony, so I have to ask, so how has the book been received? I mean, it's got a few accolades here on the cover. Story Monsters approved, Book Excellence Awards finalist, and this one's a little hard to read just because of the engraving. The E-Lit Awards gold medalist. I mean, it sounds like it's been great, but I guess awards notwithstanding. I mean, how has it been with the public? Have you had families or kids come up and say how much they enjoy it?
Yeah, I have, because I made an effort to distribute that book. I mean, I had my own copies, and I would plant them sometimes in a local library,
Hmm.
or as gifts. I just to the optometrist just the other day. She she's telling me about her grandkids, and I said, "Oh, by the way, I write stories for children." She's like, and she went on. Oh, well, let's go. I said, "No, no, no, no. I'll go home and I'll come back in a couple of days, and I'll bring you the orphan, and I'll bring you Lucas in the Game of Chance for your older grandkid." And they'll get in touch with me, and they'll say, "I really, really liked the Keeper of the Forest.
Hmm.
What an interesting character." And did you make up that? did somebody give you that dialogue or no, I made it up, man. Come on, give me a break, you know. And so, so I think that yeah, people have been very help, helpful in saying to me, carry on, because that's what I think happens.
Hmm.
Is when you see that one story is doing well, and a lot of the time with Lucas in the Game of Chance, they'll talk about his survival
Hmm.
because I think you want after a while you want to cheer him on, and so yeah, I it's been very helpful.
Okay, so you kind of mentioned this a little bit. So what's up next for you? I mean, you said you've got something that you're working on. Is there a sequel to The Orphan? I mean, do you just have are you juggling several projects now, or do you have one like this? This is the one I'm going to get out this year.
Yeah, well, the one that I'm working on is tentatively titled, or the working title is The Imposter. And it's, I guess I could boil it down to say that it's about identity theft.
Hmm.
But it's identity theft in my mind, I'm imagining it in like the 19th century.
Hmm.
And so a lot of what I did was to try to fabricate that environment somewhat in the South Atlantic and then eventually in Iceland. So, and that's in my, I don't mention Iceland, but in my mind, that's where I'm at. So,
Okay.
so it's identity theft in the sense that someone comes into someone else's life and says, I want your name and your title and your rewards. And if you don't shut up, I will destroy you.
Hmm. Is this another YA skewing book, or is this more for a slightly older
Well,
audience?
they're telling, well, in the writing group, they were saying it sounds like it's more for, more for YA.
Hmm.
And so I thought, all right, well, let me just see. I don't know. An editor would tell me about that, of course,
Hmm.
if I wanted to move in that direction. Yeah, I mean, if I wanted to move in the direction of, going out into the wide market, as
Sure.
it,
Sure.
or do I want to, and I hate to mention self-publishing because right away people cringe, but when you're dealing with, well, Rick Light is my mentor in a sense because he's my book marketer
Hmm.
and he also publishes, and so we talked about this recently, that and Rick would or Rick or other people that I've come into contact with who do quality self-publishing would never let a book leave their confines unless it were quality,
Hmm.
and that's what I'm finding. Now, that wasn't always the case early on, because I've been at this for a long, long time. I mean, I started my first course in children's literature, which I knew nothing about children's literature, never had it, never was around it, didn't see it when I was growing up. 1971
Oh my.
at the University of Iowa.
Wow.
I went to the advisor there and he said, well, if you want to become a scholar of children's literature and young adult literature, then you got to start reading every
Hmm.
day 100 books or something, So I mean, I just, I went at it, and it was what an awakening. It's
Hmm.
been marvelous.
That's great. So Anthony Manna and his book Lucas and the Game of Chance. So how can people get in touch with you to find out more? Do you have a website? Are you on social media?
Yeah, well, I am. I have a website. It's Anthony Anthony at anthonymannabooks.com.
AnthonyMannaBooks.com. Okay. And are you on any social media platforms? Like if
I
people want to follow
was,
you?
I was till I burned out.
Oh, okay.
When yeah, it got to be too. I was finding that I wasn't giving myself enough time to breathe.
Hmm.
So now I go in and out of some of the sites, but I gave it up for a while because I just really needed to spend my time writing.
Sure. Sure. Okay. And so if people want to get Lucas and the Game of Chance or any of your other books, they can go to AnthonyMannaBooks.com and that's where they can order from.
Yeah, or also Amazon.
Okay. That
Yeah.
works great. Anthony and Manna, thank you so much for being here today. This was a fantastic discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. It's been great. What a nice invitation. And, the thing about it is we use technology. And so, because I'm an old guy, I think we did it. There's really in there. And, and I'm here and we're talking to one another. So, Paul, thank you so much. It's been great. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
my pleasure. My pleasure. And again, it's Anthony Manna, and his book is Lucas and the Game of Chance. And you can check out all of his books at his website, anthonymannabooks.com. Viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like and feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. I do have stuff on social media. You can check out my screenwriting blog. That's maximumz.blog. Still on Twitter, for now anyway, at maximum_Z. And the show's Twitter account is at podcast CWL. If you want to check out my Blue Sky or Instagram, it's at Pez Screenwriting, PEZ. And the show is also on Blue Sky at podcast CWL. And I got some books too. My Go Ahead and Ask books, those are on Amazon. The ones about screenwriting and pie, two very wonderful things. Like I said, that's Anthony. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.